The principle was that the children were not getting divorced, I was.
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman and you're listening to No Filter, candid conversations that count. Chloe Shorten has attracted a lot of attention over the last few weeks. She's the wife of Bill Shorten, who will potentially be our next Prime Minister. And many have actually said that during this campaign they wish they could vote for Chloe, people from both sides. She humanises Bill, is what people say. She makes him look good, not just aesthetically, but because she's smart and warm and funny. And for a politician with very low likeability numbers in the polls, Chloe's ability to shine a positive light on her husband is a major political asset. Chloe herself is a businesswoman, an author, the daughter of former Governor-General Quentin Bryce, and a mother of 3. As a kid, she dreamed that she'd grow up, meet the love of her life, get married, have kids, and grow old with that same person. But like 1 in 3 marriages, Chloe's life didn't work out that way because her relationship fell apart. That's how in her mid-30s, after being married for 10 years, Chloe found herself a divorced mum of 2 kids. Nobody in her family had ever been divorced before. Her parents have been married for 55 years and counting. So Chloe was navigating being a single mum when she began dating Bill Shorten. He was a junior minister at the time, and together with Chloe's 2 kids, they became a blended family. Soon after, they had a daughter together. Clementine was born in 2009. Chloe and I first met in the weirdest way a long time ago. I was very junior. I'd started working at Cleo magazine, and she was a freelancer in Queensland who was helping me put together the annual 50 Most Eligible Bachelors issue. So that was a really terrible job for 2 young single girls to be working on. And we had this conversation about 2 years ago after she'd written a book called Take Heart about how to navigate modern step families. Here's Chloe Shorten. Hey, with any book that's personal, it's not just your story, it's the story of people around you. So when you first flagged the idea with your family of origin and your family that you have created, how did people react?
Kids were really supportive and I had to kind of tone them down about it a bit. My husband was a little bit nervous but very confident that that I had an important story to tell. And my siblings were really worried about what I was going to say about them.
What about your mum?
Oh, my mum was great. She
fine.
kept saying, yeah, or, I would ring her and say, do you remember this? And she would say, oh, yeah, it wasn't that, it was this, So she was actually kind of giving me a little bit of detail because she's got one of those elephant memories.
When you were a little girl, did you grow up dreaming to be part of a blended family?
Yeah, nah. I thought that I was going to be doing exactly what my parents did largely. And so I thought, well, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to marry this type of person and then I'm going to have this kind of life and this many children and, all of their names were picked out and you name it. But that was when I was about 12. And then by the time I actually got married, I had grown up a little bit. But it was a devastating thing to have a marriage end, and it's very difficult for everybody around you, really.
I didn't realise you came from such a big family. You're one of 5 or 6?
5.
Was there any divorce in your family?
No. Well, I was the first of my generation, but then I subsequently found out there was an auntie here and a great uncle there and even someone a bit further back than that. So,
but in your immediate family? In
my immediate family,
you were breaking ground.
Yep.
Are you the youngest?
No, I'm the 4th out of 5, which is kind of nothing in the pecking order because you're not the littlest and you're not the oldest and you're not really a middle child.
You're just nothing. You're just number 4.
It's the lint.
And not the chocolate kind.
No.
What was your memory? Because I'm from a blended family, but I didn't even grow up thinking of it like that. In terms of pop culture, now, of course, you've got Modern Family and so many depictions of blended families, but Brady Bunch was really the only one I can think of, and that didn't seem to be a blended family, did it?
No, there was Eight is Enough as well. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
8 is Enough.
That's right, with a stepmother.
Yeah. And largely it's either they are big picture, epic fails of, Disney stereotypes or the Brothers Grimm, or they were overly romanticised shows like the Brady Bunch. I mean, nobody ever ever referred to Mrs. Brady's former husband. Do we know whether or not he
or
died,
Mike Brady's former
you know,
wife? They were always very clean depictions of,
that's right.
families, weren't they? Even in Cinderella, there was no pesky biological mother hanging around.
No, or you know, just, and this sort of stereotyping is very unhelpful. So when you have role models of any kind, you can start to peg what you're doing, you know, to them, and that's really what I was looking for with the book. I was looking for, where are the stories that show the outcomes are going to be okay? Where are the stories that will give me this confidence that if I do things in a certain way, the likelihood is that the children will thrive and, you know, more than survive. They'll thrive and be healthy, happy kids. And it was very hard to find that. You know, there was lots of examples and stories about those first few years, you know, when people actually remarry or divorce and then go off and, you know, become sole parents. There's a lot of personal accounts, and then there's a lot of deep research, clinical research, and extraordinary work done by these people all over the world, and particularly here in Australia. We have some serious experts on blended families and non-nuclear families.
How common is it in Australia?
More than 2 in 5 kids lives in a non-nuclear family environment. So it's, you know, largely 43%. And finding out exactly how many people we're talking about is really difficult, because when we look at the statistics, they're based on, you know, largely the census and other research, which doesn't necessarily give us all the information we need, because a lot of people don't want to label themselves. And that, again, is about the stereotyping. They won't want to. A lot of people won't fill out a census form saying, I am a part of a step family.
Because of the stigma.
Yeah.
You were married quite a long time. So you got married when you were 25, had your kids at, 29 and a couple in your early 30s, and you didn't get divorced or you didn't separate until after, it's 16 years you were married?
That's right. We were together, all together.
Chloe, that's a long time. You say long marriages are not a given in your book, and this idea that we all think it's going to be happily ever after. But that is a long innings.
That's longer than the average marriage. That was not the whole time we were married. We were married for 10 years and together for another 6 years before that. But even in that time, you know, the average marriage in Australia now is about 12 years. And it's interesting that the divorce rate has actually tapered off. We've actually got lower divorce rates now than we had 10 years ago. When
your first marriage ended, you talked about, in the book, you talk about how that impacted on your identity. How was that for you?
Well, I suspect for everybody it's a loss, a massive change, and then there is a sense that, well, for me, okay, well, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? What was it that I brought to that situation that, you know, that I can learn from and I can teach my kids? In particular, you need to look at, if you come from a blended family, what the lessons are so that your children don't have potentially unstable relationships themselves. So relationships of any kind, family, raising children, it's all about stability. It's not about what the family form looks like. So I think I stopped being hung up on the form and started to really look deeply at the functioning of the relationship and the family.
But, you know, I suppose when a marriage ends, the two parties are at a point where they agree, or where one person decides that it's come to the end of the road. But for the kids, they don't want it to end. I mean, assuming it's not a situation where there's violence at home or it's a horrible situation. You write about your children grieving it like a death, the end of their parents' marriage. How do you move forward with your life without trying to hurry the children through their stages of grief and processing?
That's a really great question. Slowly, patiently, and consistently talking, asking questions, seeking advice. I think we have an idea that we don't really need these coaches to help us to establish our families and get really great habits, that we can just do it by instinct and by sort of reflecting on our own childhoods and things. But as society changes, you have all these other big things that impact on your family life and behaviour from the outside. So we should be learning as we go, and I love the idea that we should all have, whether it's a first marriage or a second marriage, a coach, people who can help us, good resources, good books, investing in preventive maintenance, I call it. And so for the children, that was largely about making sure that I had a really good expert advice. Do
you mean in the form of a counsellor?
Yep, in the form of a family psychologist who was excellent. Also lots and lots of books. I was reading, I was online, and then I started to become really quite discerning about what I would take from some of the resources.
And what ground rules, I guess, did you put in place with their father so that they would maintain a strong connection to him?
Oh, look, it wasn't really ground rules for him, and I wouldn't want to speak for him, but I don't mean ground rules for him, but I mean ground rules for how you two behaved in front of each other, how much the kids spent with him. Like, how did you navigate that whole process? The principle was that the children were not getting divorced, I was. And so the children's, relationship and, the love and care for that, for those kids wasn't to minimising change. Minimising as much of the change as we could.
And how did you do that practically?
That's
how
complicated,
did you
and
minimise change?
It took such a long time. When moving close by, but for some people that's just not possible. And so my story is not necessarily as helpful as as it could. My story is not everybody's story. But
sure.
for me, it was about marshalling as many resources as I could, managing resources, minimising change, and I wasn't really that good at that. And initially I was, but then there was a lot of changes at once because the baby came along. So explaining as much as possible and ensuring that that I was reinforcing the love and bond between them and their dad. So that has not changed. But it's taken time, and it's taken a lot of maturity and commitment on the behalf of three adults to do that, as well as the support of family around us. If you're remarrying, or you're coming out of a marriage, and you have an extended family that is helpful and supportive and understanding, that has a great benefit for those children. And grandparents in particular have a huge role in stabilising children in both of these situations. And so we're really undervaluing or under-recognising just how incredibly crucial grandparents are. Grandparents, step-grandparents, you name it. And I was very fortunate that I had an excellent mother-in-law, and my parents were fantastic too.
The most nerve-wracking moment really is sitting down and telling your kids. How did you prepare for that?
With the expert's advice. I actually had a script. I actually had worked out a script of what to say, where to go when this came up. I'd actually prepared FAQs, frequently asked questions. I am such a girly swat, as my editor calls me, that I had really researched what it was that I should say.
So what is best
I wanted
practice?
The benefit of that to apply to other people. Well, it was all scripted to those kids. It wasn't just, one size fits all. So it was largely about taking things very slowly, explaining that it's, that it's not their fault. It takes a very long time for children to process that they are not the ones responsible for what happens in the relationship of their parents. And so, really focusing on that and on minimising the change and explaining as much as possible that their parents are there to love them and cherish them and look after them, regardless of the fact that they're not living together. They are hard conversations, very hard conversations. But if you look at it through a child's eyes, it's about reassurance and security and stability. And for them, really, that's what they're looking for. There's a lot of research to be done still on the outcomes for kids over time, but I did look at a really amazing longitudinal study that was done in the US that looked at grown-ups, 30, 40 years down the track of some of that first wave of children of divorce. And 80% of them are fine, thriving, happy, healthy, ordinary people with functioning relationships themselves. The 20% who don't fare well don't fare well because they have resources taken away from them. And for a lot of people, it's, single mums who become quite impoverished. It's lots of change at once, so they have to move to a smaller house. They have to, there is loss compounded on top of the loss of their parent being there. So,
how did you determine custody arrangements? Because that's something that most people find very difficult.
Well, that took time, and it's not really... And I don't go into that in my book out of respect for their dad.
Sure.
But needless to say that years on now, we have lots of shared activities together, including, we celebrate all the kids' things together, and that does take time and commitment and maturity.
Because that's everybody's ideal, isn't it? The idea of conscious uncoupling and that you will still be able to come together. But in most cases, that's just not possible in those early years, is it?
Yes, especially where there has been, abuse or violence, which is also, I was listening to somebody talking this morning, a woman from the University of Adelaide on the ABC radio speaking this morning about the number of assaults that are presenting in Australian hospitals. Anyway, some huge amount, 20,000 or something a year, and 10,000 of them are related to intimate partner violence. So we've got a long way to go towards supporting, I think, men in the community. Most Australian men are absolutely fabulous, gorgeous, like my husband. But we've got a long way to go to support the entire subsystem, I suppose, of each one of these families, and I'm hoping a bit of a step in that direction.
In terms of your status as a woman, you went from your identity as being a married mother of two in your community to being a single mother. Did you find you were treated differently?
In very subtle ways, and probably only afterwards. But I found things like the expectation that being a sole mother with two kids, that I was under more pressure to perform well in the workplace, because even though nothing changed in terms of my daily commitment to my job and my work, it was this sense that, well, she's separated or she's on her own with kids now, it must be harder, and therefore we should maybe pull back on this bit of giving this responsibility. Or they were very subtle.
Did you appreciate that understanding, or did you find it patronising?
No, I was quizzical about it because there wasn't any change in my capacity other than my time commitment,
What about socially?
Socially, a lot of people surprised me, and some people really disappointed me. And I think that's the one of the great learnings in any lessons in any big change experience that you have. There are some people who will delight you who you never would have expected, and then there are some people who will let you down, and you wouldn't have expected that either.
I think that's something that surprises a lot of people. They think about ending the relationship. They think about the impact that will have on the kids. They will think about the practical sides of where they're going to live. But few people realise, I think, how dislocating it can be socially, because so much of your life is built around you as a family unit and you as a couple. So from your relationship with your partner's extended family to, couple friends that you have, all of those things really shift, don't they? And they're all very much disrupted.
They do for you and for your partner, but for your children, there must be continuity. And having a commitment to that is really vital for the children's well-being, that they have this sense that they will still see their cousins, they will still do those other ritualistic things, that traditional things that they had done before, and that can be really tough. So the people who often can provide the greatest bridge to do that are, siblings and, aunties and uncles and grandparents, and that shouldn't be understated, I think.
Dating as a single mum. Little girls don't grow up dreaming of that either, do they?
No, I don't suspect they do. I don't think little boys do either. And again, this stuff is not reflected in any of our general mainstream, content and popular culture.
So how did you go about that? How did you go about when you met Bill, introducing him to the kids? Very
slowly, and with no expectations, and with no labels on what the relationship was at that time.
Did you just
explaining
this is a
with his friends? We're out. Yep,
yeah.
That's right. And
were they very protective of you?
No, they weren't really. No, they were just happy little, and I suppose that they probably would have had confusion at some time, but we were taking advice along the way, and so I think we're fortunate that we did that. I think we're really fortunate.
One of the things that you write about at the end of the book, you talk to Bill and ask him what his advice would be, and he said, "Be their friend."
Yeah,
which is so interesting because it's the polar opposite of what parents are usually advised to do. It's like, don't be their friend, be their parent.
Yeah,
but with a step parent,
for young players, that one.
Yeah, so tell me the difference about that and how a step parent needs to approach kids.
The great phrase that I heard a woman called Patricia Papernow, who's one of the sort of gurus in the field, she said it's connection before correction. Before you assume the role of the disciplinarian, particularly for the bloke, which is often what society expects of a male in a household, is to make the connection, to be a friend and just get to know them, and build trust with one another and a relationship. And then if they're that child, depending on their age, of course, too, then over time builds up that relationship that can lead to that person, the other person making some rules or reinforcing those rules. That's great. But that doesn't always happen, and you certainly should avoid going into it with those expectations. Similarly, stepmothers have a really complicated time of it because society expects women to go into relationships and be the nurturer and the organiser and the domestic, arranger. And naturally, women tend to fall into that. And that is a real trap and can be very difficult and create all sorts of tensions because the children really aren't necessarily wanting that. And yet that's often where she falls. So the partner has to try to help her not do that. And then she, again, makes the connection and the friendship. And sometimes that doesn't even work out. Sometimes, there is no great deep bond between a stepchild and a step-parent. And as long as there is respect and kindness there, then that's good enough. So it's really understanding, taking the pressure down for those people, for whoever it is that's the new person, and also respecting, allowing the original parent to have a bit of space with those children on their own. So going from that sole parent time where you're actually really intensively in that relationship and almost exclusively because you're focusing on their well-being, going from that into a relationship, it's important. I've learned it's important from all the studies that I've read that little bubble can have time on its own as well, and that shouldn't, even though sometimes it makes the other person feel excluded and on the outer, that's okay, and that the relationship between all of them can still be healthy with that in mind.
You and Bill dated for about 18 months before you moved to Melbourne with your kids, which I imagine was difficult in itself, a difficult decision between having them stay close to their father and then moving to Melbourne. And then you guys married in 2009 and had your daughter Clementine together in 2010. So I wanted to ask you about that. It was your third child and his first. This is quite common in blended families, that you've got someone who's done it before and someone who it's all brand new. How different were your experiences, and how did you manage it for your first two children?
Well, there's that vague sort of fugue state of memory that I have about those first few months with the baby. I think I've blocked a lot of it out. And that sleeplessness that is so terrible. I do remember having all of them in bed with me quite a lot. And, so there was desperate to get sleep and going past my bed and patting my bed, my pillow. I love you, bed. And so that's really the first 6 months. That's what I remember the most. Adjustment of any kind with a new baby, even with a nuclear family in a nuclear family, let's say.
What are the extra challenges for a blended family?
The extra challenges, because what we had was the age gap too. So we had that 7-8 year age gap. So the children were old enough to realise that had some benefits, them being older, because they weren't, going through that terrible sort of toddler baby rivalry. But they adored her and treated her like the little precious little deity. And that bond of them being a little bit older and loving that baby so much was really quite a gift.
So it was sounds like Clementine was quite a binding factor in the new family unit that you created.
And I put that down to the approach that we took, the extended family support we had, and the ages of the children.
When you say the approach that you took, what do you mean?
The approach being going into it with this really nerdy study, research. I don't know, laboratory method I used. Well, I was constantly ringing people and asking them things. I'd get onto the raisingchildren.net website, look, I'd be sitting in the pantry and the children would be sitting at the dinner table and there'd be, the baby in the high chair and the two little ones, and I'd be going, how do I handle this question or whatever? So I'd go into the pantry, which is one of those sort of walk-in pantries, close the door, get onto my laptop and type into the raisingchildren.net website. I am sure that there are questions in that website on that resource that are just my questions that they've rehashed because they're so bizarre. It was that SWOT approach that I took that I think was helpful. I'm trying to find some examples for you, but things about conversations, not shutting down conversations we can talk about that later, or going down the rabbit hole with the kids whenever they went there and allowing them to go as far as they wanted to go with it, which meant, lots and lots of questions. And then the answers would be, just hang on a second, I'll come back to you.
I think that's important sometimes. You don't have to answer every question in the moment. But in terms of you kept seeing a family counsellor, or have you been back and forth to navigate?
And I've actually added other experts along the way of people that I'll speak to, either in a formal or an informal sense when things come up. So I think that families, if they can possibly get those resources, and a lot of them now are in libraries and on the web, and that is absolutely critical for us to say to ourselves, actually, we don't have all the answers. This is not easy. Parenting is a great privilege and a great challenge, and it does not come naturally.
You write that you used this research to make sure your family was moving through the stages correctly. What did you find the stages were?
Well, I suppose there's that sort of, they're often the stages that you have in a first marriage too, which is the sort of the fantasy phase, this unrealistic expectations about how things are going to go. People don't necessarily tell you. That's informed largely by your own childhood, your own experiences, and lots of movies you've watched, books you've read. So there's that, I suppose, busting that myth, really, busting all those myths next, and coming down to the point where that where the difficulties start to bubble up, which is another stage, really, is starting to understand what they are and recognise them for what they are, then mobilising and realising that you need some support and some help and expertise, and then moving through the stages of the action from that mobilisation stage, acting on it, implementing them, recognising that you're not perfect, and that these things are fluid and take time. You don't need to stick to traditional roles of a nuclear family. Trying to replicate them won't work. Largely, a step family, a blended family, is not a subset or a subcategory of a nuclear family. They come in all shapes and sizes, and in Australia, it's the functioning of the family, not what it looks like, that's the more important thing. So focusing on that function, understanding that there are stages that you go through and that you'll come out the other end stronger, happier, healthier, with more resilient kids.
I think the most interesting thing that you said was that it took time to get to that point where you can celebrate those milestones together, and you can be, the heat goes out of it, I suppose. The heat goes out of the breakup, and you remold your family around this new shape.
Managing expectations as you go into it is really important. I think one of the things that I had learned from one of the specialists was to lower your expectations of how long it takes. It takes 5 years, not 5 months. it can take 3 years, not 3 months. And rushing through only puts more pressure on you and your partner and the kids. So slowing down, taking the pressure off, not trying to conform to other people's ideas of how you should be creating and supporting your family, asking people for help and support, reaching out. It's a very difficult thing to do. Women do it all the time when they have their first babies, but they often have, maternal and child health nurses to help them do that, to put them into networks. I'd love to see some sort of support networks in the community for blended and step families and for sole parent families. There are 63,000, according to the census, grandparents in Australia raising grandchildren. I'd love to know who it is that reaches out to those people. So it's understanding that it doesn't just take a village to raise a child. It takes a village to raise a family of any kind. And so...
There is, you're right, there is no one size fits all, but for anyone who is experiencing either creating a new family or perhaps evolving from the shape of one family to the next, take heart. Your book is a fantastic place to start. Chloe, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations. Thanks for listening to No Filter. If you are feeling uncertain about who to vote for this weekend, may I suggest checking out our daily podcast, The Quickie. They have done a really great episode called Who Should I Vote For?, where they go through, our host Claire Murphy goes through all of the different parties and their basic platforms and their basic policies. You can search for The Quickie in your podcast app or follow the links in our show notes. No Filter is produced by Eliza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and I'll see you on Mamma Mia.